The first time I saw my own face again, it was hanging in a stranger's dining hall. I should not have been there at all. Lady Ashworth's autumn supper was no place for a woman who worked as a music tutor. But my pupil, her niece, had begged me to accompany her, and Lady Ashworth was too distracted by her seating arrangements to question one extra guest in a borrowed dress. So I stood in the corridor outside the dining room, waiting for the doors to open, and I turned to admire the paintings on the wall, and the ground fell away beneath me. It was my family's portrait, the one from Whitmore Hall. My mother in pale blue silk, my father standing behind her, with one hand on the chair. My brother Edward, aged 9, with his little spaniel at his feet. And me. Except, not me. Not anymore. Where I had once stood at my mother's left side, there was only a smudge of garden, a hedge that didn't match the others.
A blur of green paint, slightly darker than the background, covering the place where a girl of 16 had once worn a white dress and held a sprig of jasmine. I had known they'd done it. My brother had written to tell me, 3 years ago, in the last letter I ever received from anyone in my family. Father has had you removed from the portrait. I am sorry. I tried to stop him. But knowing it and seeing it are different countries entirely. My hand was shaking. I pressed it flat against the wall and forced myself to breathe. You seem arrested by the Stafford portrait. The voice came from behind me, low, unhurried, with the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need volume. I turned. He was tall, dark-haired, with sharp features that might have been called severe if not for the unexpected warmth in his eyes. He was dressed impeccably, not ostentatiously, but in the way that whispers rather than shouts of money. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Curiosity, perhaps. Or something more careful than curiosity. "I beg your pardon," I said. "I did not mean to stare." "You were not staring. You looked as though you'd seen a ghost." I nearly laughed. He had no idea how close to the truth that was. "I simply admire the composition," I said, and turned back to the painting, as though it were any painting, as though my own erased face were not staring back at me like a wound. "It is a fine example of domestic portraiture." "It is," he said. He stepped closer, and I caught the scent of sandalwood and cold air, as though he'd recently come in from outside. "Though I confess, it's the composition that troubles me most. Do you see, there?" He pointed to exactly the spot I could not stop looking at. The smudge of green. The ghost of my shoulder beneath the paint. Someone has been removed. My throat closed. Have they? Quite crudely, in fact. The artist who did the original was far more skilled than whoever painted over it. You can still see the outline if the light catches it. He tilted his head, studying the painting the way one might study a puzzle. I first encountered this piece 3 years ago, in the private collection of a baron in Suffolk who was selling off his late wife's acquisitions. The catalogue listed 4 figures. There were only 3. I could not stop thinking about it. When it came to auction last spring, I purchased it immediately. I have spent the time since trying to determine who the 4th figure was. He turned to look at me then, and something in his gaze sharpened. I realized, too late, that my eyes were wet. "Forgive me," I said. "The candlelight. My eyes water terribly in candlelight. If you will excuse me." I walked away before he could respond. My heart was hammering so violently I could feel it in my fingertips. I slipped through the nearest door and found myself in a small parlor, empty, lit by a single lamp, and I pressed both hands over my mouth and breathed until the world stopped tilting. He had my portrait. This stranger, this man with the careful eyes and the low voice, had bought my family's painting, hung it in a place of honor, and noticed that someone was missing. No one else in 5 years had noticed, or if they had, no one had cared enough to wonder. I did not know his name. I did not want to know his name. I wanted to leave this house and never return. But the door opened behind me, and Lady Ashworth's niece, Charlotte, appeared with flushed cheeks and breathless excitement.
There you are. Miss Lennox, you must come. Supper is starting, and you will never guess who is seated at our end of the table. She seized my arm. The Duke of Ashford. He is Lady Ashworth's nephew, and he is impossibly handsome. And he never comes to these things, apparently. So everyone is in a state. Charlotte, come. You are next to Mr. Phelps, who is dull, but you will be across from his grace. And I need you nearby, or I shall say something foolish and die of mortification. She pulled me into the dining room before I could protest. And there he was, the man from the corridor, standing behind the chair directly across from mine, watching the approach with an expression that had shifted from curiosity to something I might, in a woman, have called recognition. The Duke of Ashford. He bowed. I curtsied. Charlotte performed the introduction with trembling formality, and I heard my borrowed name spoken aloud. Miss Lennox, who is my music tutor. And I watched his face for any flicker of suspicion. There was none. Why would there be? Lennox was my mother's maiden name. No one in London knew it. No one in London knew me at all. I had made very certain of that. I learned later that Charlotte had arranged the seating herself. Lady Ashworth, who indulged her niece in all things, had allowed Charlotte to place the cards at their end of the table, a privilege Charlotte had seized to ensure she sat beside the Duke. My position across from him was simply the consequence of Charlotte's wanting me within rescue distance. She had not schemed. She had merely been nervous, and her nervousness had placed me directly in the gaze of the one man in London I could not afford to be seen by. Supper was an elaborate affair. 6 courses, 3 wines, conversation that darted and circled around politics, horse racing, and Lady Ashworth's upcoming charity ball. I spoke when spoken to. I complimented Mr. Phelps on his knowledge of Italian architecture. I did everything in my power not to look at the man across from me. But he was looking at me. Not rudely, not with the bold, raking assessment I had learned to expect from men who considered a music tutor fair game. His gaze was quieter than that, thoughtful, like he was trying to place me in a context he couldn't quite reach. During the 3rd course, he addressed me directly for the first time. Miss Lennox, Charlotte tells me you are an accomplished musician. Charlotte is a generous pupil, I said. She says you trained at the Conservatorio in Naples. I had not expected Charlotte to share that detail. I took a careful sip of wine. I spent 2 years there, yes. An unusual path for an Englishwoman. I am an unusual woman, Your Grace. Something changed in his expression. A flicker, not of suspicion but of interest. Genuine interest. The kind that comes when you hear a note you didn't expect in a familiar melody. I don't doubt it, he said, and turned to answer Lady Ashworth's question about his hunting dogs. And I spent the rest of supper reminding myself that this man owned a portrait with my erased face on it, and any further conversation was therefore an act of extraordinary recklessness. I should have left London the next morning. Instead, 2 weeks later, I was standing in his music room. Charlotte had arranged it, innocently, or so she believed. The Duke wished to hire a musician for his annual winter gathering. Charlotte had recommended me.
A professional engagement, nothing more.
His London residence was a handsome house in Grosvenor Square, elegantly appointed but not cold. The music room was on the first floor, south-facing, with excellent acoustics and a pianoforte that made me ache with envy. And on the wall beside the door, in a position where the afternoon light fell perfectly across it, my family's portrait. He had moved it. It had been at Lady Ashworth's on loan, he explained when he noticed my gaze. This was its permanent home. "You are staring again," he said from the doorway behind me. "Forgive me, Your Grace. It is a striking piece. It is an incomplete piece." He entered the room and stood beside me, both of us facing the painting. I could feel the warmth of him, the half step too close that he seemed entirely unaware of. "I told you at supper that someone had been removed. I have since learned more." He paused. "The family is the Staffords of Whitmore Hall. The father, Sir Richard Stafford, had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. The daughter's name was Cecilia." My name struck me like a hand across the face. "5 years ago," he continued, his voice careful, almost gentle, as though he were telling a story about someone long dead, "there was a scandal. The details vary depending on whom you ask. The most consistent account is that Cecilia Stafford was discovered in compromising circumstances with a married officer of no particular fortune. Her father disowned her within a week. She was sent away, removed from the family records, struck from the will and," he gestured at the painting, "painted out of the portrait." I said nothing. I could not. My jaw was locked and my lungs were empty, and the room had gone very bright and very still. "No one seems to know what became of her," he said. "I have made inquiries. She is not in any workhouse registry. She is not listed as deceased. She simply vanished." "Perhaps she wished to vanish," I heard myself say. "Perhaps." He turned to look at me, and his gaze was too direct, too searching, and I understood with a cold shock that he was not making idle conversation. He was watching my reaction. He had been watching it since the corridor at Lady Ashworth's. Or perhaps she had no choice. I forced my hands still at my sides. "Why does it matter to you, Your Grace? She is a stranger." "Because someone tried to erase her," he said. "And I find I cannot stop wondering what kind of person one would need to be. What kind of threat, or disappointment, or inconvenience, to be painted out of one's own family, as though one had never existed at all." His voice, on that last phrase, was not detached. It was not the voice of an art collector pursuing provenance. There was something raw beneath it, something personal. I looked away first. I had to. "I will review the program for your winter gathering," I said. "Shall I correspond through your steward?" He let the silence sit for a moment, long enough that I felt it press against my skin. And then he said, "Through my steward, of course. Good afternoon, Miss Lennox." I gathered my things. I walked to the door. And just before I stepped through it, I looked back and found him standing in front of the portrait, one hand raised, his fingertips hovering just above the green smudge where my face had been. He did not know I was watching. The tenderness in that gesture, the sheer, reverent attention he was giving to the absence of me, was the most dangerous thing I had ever seen. I should have left London that evening. I should have written Charlotte a note of apology, packed my one trunk, and taken the mail coach to anywhere. Bath, York, Edinburgh. It did not matter. anywhere this man and his too perceptive gaze could not reach me. But I did not leave, because for the first time in 5 years, someone had looked at the place where I had been erased and called it wrong. And God help me, I wanted him to keep looking. Over the following 3 weeks, I returned to Grosvenor Square 4 times. Twice to rehearse with the small ensemble he had engaged. Once to discuss the program with his steward, Mr. Hale, a brisk and efficient man who treated me with professional courtesy and nothing more. And once, the time that undid me, because the Duke sent a note, through Charlotte, asking whether I might advise him on a particular piece of sheet music he had acquired at auction. A sonata, he said, that he could not identify. He thought it might be Italian. I knew it was a pretext. He knew I knew. We both went through with it anyway. The music room again. Late afternoon, the light going amber through the tall windows. He was standing by the pianoforte when I arrived, the sheaf of music open on the stand. And when I entered, he turned with an expression that was trying very hard to be composed, and not entirely succeeding. "Miss Lennox, thank you for coming. You said it was Italian." "I suspect it is. I am not qualified to confirm." I crossed to the pianoforte and examined the score. It was, in fact, a beautiful piece, a sonata by Dussek, richly chromatic, with a slow movement that shifted between tenderness and grief in a way that required real interpretive skill to navigate. Not obscure, exactly, but unusual enough that a man with no formal training might plausibly have been uncertain of its origin. He had chosen well, or someone had chosen well for him. I looked up. He had the decency to look slightly abashed. "Dussek," I said, "his sonata in F minor, published around 1807. It is not unknown, Your Grace, but I will grant that it is less obvious than you might have managed. I confess, I asked Mr. Hale to select something that would not insult your intelligence," he said. "I fear he only partially succeeded." "He succeeded well enough. This is a demanding piece." I turned back to the score. Dussek wrote it after the death of a close friend. You can hear it in the second movement, the way the melody keeps reaching for something it cannot hold. "Play it for me," he said. "Your Grace, you are a musician. This is a pianoforte. I am asking you to play, not to do anything improper." He pulled a chair from the wall and sat down. Not close, but close enough that I could see his hands resting on his knees, his fingers still. "Please." I sat at the instrument. The keys were cool and smooth and perfectly tuned. I had not played a pianoforte this fine since Whitmore Hall, since before. I began the Dussek, and within 4 bars, my hands remembered something my mind had tried to forget. What it felt like to play without counting the cost, without rationing the joy, without bracing for someone to take it away. The music filled the room. It climbed the walls and pooled in the corners, and I forgot, for a few minutes, that I was anyone other than what I had always been. A girl who loved music more than safety, more than reputation, more than the approval of a father who had never once listened to her play without finding something to correct. When I finished, the silence was enormous. I did not turn around. I could hear him breathing behind me, slightly unsteady, as though something had shifted in his chest that he hadn't expected to move. "You did not learn to play like that in 2 years in Naples," he said quietly. "No. You have been playing since childhood." "Since I was 4. "Who taught you?" "My mother, before she died." My voice was steady. It should not have been, but it was, because I had practiced this particular steadiness for 5 years, and I was very good at it. Another silence, then, "Miss Lennox, I must tell you something, and I want you to hear it as it is intended, not as an accusation, but as honesty between two people who are, I think, past pretending." My hands were still on the keys. I curled my fingers slowly until my knuckles whitened. "Go on." "I have found her, Cecilia Stafford, or rather, I believe I have been speaking with her for the better part of a month." The room went airless. "The eyes," he said very gently. "In the portrait, before the overpainting, there are traces. The original artist used a particular shade of grey-green for the daughter's eyes. It is unusual. I have seen it only once outside that canvas." I closed my eyes. My hands fell from the keys into my lap. "I did not plan this," he said. "I did not know you would be at Lady Ashworth's. I did not know Charlotte's music tutor was. I did not arrange any of this." "Then what did you arrange?" My voice came out harder than I intended. "Those inquiries you mentioned? 3 years of searching for a disgraced woman who was none of your concern." "Yes." "Why?" Silence. When he spoke, the careful composure was gone. What remained was something stripped back and plain. Because when I stood in front of that portrait for the first time and saw what had been done, the clumsiness of it, the cruelty, I understood it. Not the specifics, but the principle. The idea that a family can look at one of its own and decide they would rather have a blank space. He stopped. I heard him draw a breath that caught slightly at the top, and I knew, with the instinct of someone who has spent 5 years listening for the sounds people make when they are about to tell the truth, that whatever came next would not be rehearsed. "My father did not paint me out of a portrait," he said. "He simply never looked at one that included me. 22 years in the same house, and I cannot recall a single instance of the man meeting my eyes and seeing someone he wished to claim. When he died, I inherited everything: the title, the estate, the seat in Lord's. And all I could think was that he would have preferred the line to end rather than pass to me." The room held its breath. I turned on the bench. He was sitting very still, his jaw tight, his eyes on the floor. He looked, in that moment, nothing like a duke. He looked like a boy who had memorized the shape of his father's turned back. "So when I saw that portrait," he said, "and I saw that someone had done to another person what my father did to me, not through silence, but through paint, through deliberate erasure, I could not leave it alone. I needed to know who she was, whether she had survived it, whether she was—" "What?" I whispered. He looked up, met my eyes, and said, with a rawness that made my ribs ache, "Whether she was all right." I was not all right. I had not been all right for 5 years. But sitting in that amber-lit room, with Dussek still ringing in the silence, and this man's unguarded grief laid open beside my own, I felt something I had forgotten the shape of. I felt seen. "My name is Cecilia," I said. "Cecilia Stafford. And no, I am not all right. But I am here." What followed was the most terrifying fortnight of my life. Not because of danger, not yet, but because of proximity. Now that the pretense was gone, every interaction between us carried the full, unbearable weight of honesty. He asked me to continue the engagement for the winter gathering. I agreed,
because the alternative was to walk away from the only person who had looked at my erasure and called it wrong. And I was not strong enough for that. Not yet. We were careful, always chaperoned during rehearsals. Mr. Hale or a footman present, the door open, the proprieties scrupulously observed. He called me Miss Stafford in private and Miss Lennox before others. He did not touch me. He did not crowd me. He treated me with a respect so thorough it was almost painful, because it kept reminding me what respect felt like and how long I had gone without it. But there were moments. A rehearsal 4 days after my confession, when I played a wrong note and laughed, genuinely laughed, the surprised sound of it escaping before I could catch it. And I looked up and found him watching me from across the room with an expression that I can only describe as stunned, as though my laughter had done something to him that he had not prepared for. A conversation in the corridor outside the music room, waiting for Charlotte to fetch her gloves, when he told me about Ashford Park, his estate in Derbyshire, and the way his voice softened when he described the South Garden made me understand that he loved something in this world, genuinely loved it, and that the capacity for that love was larger than the title, the house, or anything his father had tried to withhold from him. An afternoon when it rained and I could not leave, and we sat on opposite sides of the music room, a full 12 feet apart, perfectly proper, and read in silence for 2 hours, and it was the most intimate experience of my life. The quiet between us was not empty. It was full. It hummed. He never asked about the scandal. Not once. I had braced for it. The careful question, the probing reference, the inevitable moment when he would want to know what I had done and whether I deserved what followed. Every man I had ever known would have asked. My father had not even needed to ask. He had simply decided. The Duke of Ashford did not ask, and his refusal to ask said more than any words could have. It said, "I do not care what you did. I care what was done to you." But London is a small world in the places that matter, and someone was watching. I did not know her name at first. I knew only that a woman had called at the house in Grosvenor Square 3 times in 1 week, that she had been seen in conversation with Mr. Hale, and that the servants had gone quiet in a way that made the air feel different. It was Charlotte who told me. "Lady Georgiana Holt," she said, her voice carefully neutral over tea. "She is, well, she was expected to be the next Duchess of Ashford. Everyone assumed he would offer for her this season. Her mother and his late mother were friends. There is an understanding." An understanding, I repeated. Of the informal sort, nothing contracted. But Lady Georgiana does not seem to view it as informal. I set my cup down. The porcelain clicked against the saucer with a sound like a small, clean fracture. "Charlotte, I am his hired musician. There is no rivalry here." Charlotte looked at me with the particular gentleness of a young woman who sees more than she is credited for. "Miss Lennox, Cecilia." She came to the house and asked the servants who the dark-haired woman was who had been seen at the pianoforte. She did not ask about the music. Lady Georgiana Holt wasted no time. I received my first warning within 3 days. It came through her maid, a sharp-featured woman named Pruitt, who appeared at my lodging house on a Tuesday morning and delivered, with brisk efficiency, a message. Lady Georgiana was aware that a Miss Lennox had been engaged by the Duke for musical services. Lady Georgiana wished Miss Lennox to understand that the Duke's household arrangements were a matter of interest to his future family, and that any irregularity in the conduct of hired staff would be noted and acted upon. It was a threat wrapped in courtesy. I had received enough of those to recognize the shape. I told Pruitt to thank Lady Georgiana for her concern. The second warning was less polite. It came 10 days later, at a small concert at the home of a mutual acquaintance. I was not performing. I had been invited as Charlotte's companion. But Lady Georgiana was there, radiant in cream silk, and she found me during the interval. She was beautiful in the way that weapons are beautiful. Everything about her was precise. The set of her mouth, the angle of her chin, the careful architecture of her hair. She smiled when she spoke, which made it worse. "Miss Lennox, how delightful. I hear you play beautifully." She lowered her voice. Not enough that the women beside us couldn't hear, but enough to create the illusion of intimacy. "I also hear you are not quite what you seem. A music tutor with a Neapolitan education, and no family references. How unusual. One wonders what a thorough inquiry might reveal." My blood went cold. "I am sure I don't know what you mean, Lady Georgiana." "I am sure you do." Her smile widened. It did not reach her eyes. "A woman in your position should be so careful about the company she keeps, especially when that company belongs to someone else." She moved away. The woman beside us whispered. I stood very still and counted my heartbeats until the number reached something manageable. She was going to find out. She had the resources, the connections, and the motivation. And she was going to discover that Miss Lennox was Cecilia Stafford, disgraced daughter of Sir Richard Stafford, erased from her family's records and living under a borrowed name. And when she did, she would not merely expose me. She would destroy whatever fragile, impossible, unnamed thing had been growing between me and a man who deserved far better than the wreckage of my reputation. I went to Grosvenor Square the next morning to resign the engagement. He was in the library. He looked up when I entered, and I saw it. The thing I had been refusing to name. The way his whole expression shifted when he saw me. The way something tight behind his eyes released, as though my presence in a room physically eased something in him. I almost couldn't do it. "I must withdraw from the winter gathering," I said. "I will recommend another musician. Mrs. Fenton is very accomplished." "What happened?" "Nothing of consequence. I simply—" "Cecilia." My name. My real name, spoken in his voice, in that low register that made it sound like something precious rather than something discarded. I stopped. "Lady Georgiana Holt has taken an interest in my identity," I said. "She will discover the truth. When she does, your association with me will be a source of embarrassment to you, and I will not." "She came to see me yesterday." I stared at him. "She informed me that she had reason to believe my hired musician was of questionable character. She suggested that a prudent man would distance himself from any connection that might invite scrutiny." He paused. "She also implied, without subtlety, that my failure to offer for her this season was the subject of considerable discussion among her family." "Then you understand the danger?" "I understand that a woman I have known since childhood believes she has a claim on my future, and is prepared to destroy yours to enforce it." He stood. He came around the desk. He stopped 3 feet from me, and those 3 feet felt like nothing. "I am not embarrassed by you. I will not be embarrassed by you. And I will not permit Georgiana Holt, or anyone, to make you disappear again." "You cannot control what she does." "No, but I can control what I do." His voice had dropped. His eyes were steady on mine. "And I will not send you away." Not to protect my comfort, not to satisfy her expectations, not for any reason that requires me to pretend you do not matter to me. The word matter landed like a struck bell. I am a disgraced woman living under a false name, I whispered. I have no fortune, no family, no reputation. You have more courage than anyone I have ever met. You have a gift that fills rooms. You have survived things that would have destroyed a lesser person. And you are standing in my library, trying to protect me, at cost to yourself. He took one step closer, 2 feet now. Do not tell me what you lack. I can see what you are. I could not speak. My throat had sealed shut, and my vision was blurring, and I was aware, with terrible precision, of every inch of air between us. How warm it was, how charged, how little distance remained. He raised his hand, slowly, as though approaching something that might startle. His fingers stopped a breath from my cheek, not touching, hovering, asking. Stay, he said, not as my musician, as my guest, under my protection, openly, where Georgiana cannot touch you. That will cause a scandal. I am a duke. I am entitled to a scandal. A sound escaped me that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. His fingers brushed my jaw. The lightest touch, barely there, and the sensation travelled through me like a plucked string, resonant and low, and I leaned into his hand before I could stop myself. He inhaled sharply. His thumb traced the line of my cheekbone. I closed my eyes. Then the library door opened, and Mr. Hale's voice said, "Your Grace, Lord Pemberton is—" and stopped. We stepped apart. Not fast enough, not nearly fast enough. Mr. Hale, to his credit, completed his sentence without inflection, announced Lord Pemberton, and closed the door. But the damage, I knew, was done. A servant had seen.
In a house with 20 staff, a secret seen by one was a secret known by all, within the hour. Lady Georgiana struck 5 days later. She did not confront me again. That, I would learn, was not her method. Her method was quieter and far more effective. She wrote to my father. I learned afterward how she had managed it. The auction catalogue, the same one that had first drawn James to the portrait, listed the painting's provenance. The Stafford family of Whitmore Hall, Gloucestershire. It was a matter of public record. From there, any woman with a sharp mind and a compliant solicitor could trace Sir Richard Stafford's current address in a single afternoon. She did not need to know I was Cecilia. She only needed to know the portrait was the Staffords, and that a mysterious woman with no family references had appeared in the Duke's household at the same time as a painting of a family with a missing daughter. The rest was a letter, a question, and a father's wounded pride doing the work for her. Edward arrived in London on a Wednesday. He came to my lodging house unannounced, white-faced and trembling, and I opened the door to find the boy I had last seen at 14, now a young man of 19, tall and thin, and wearing an expression of barely controlled panic. "Edward, father knows where you are," he said. "Lady Holt wrote to him. She told him his disgraced daughter has been keeping company with the Duke of Ashford, and that the connection is an insult to every respectable family in London. Father is— Cecilia, he is coming. He means to put an end to it." The floor tilted beneath me. "When?" "Friday. He is bringing Mr. Cartwright, his solicitor.
He means to threaten the Duke with exposure. He will tell the world who you are, what happened, and frame it as the Duke being deceived by a disgraced woman who concealed her identity. That is not what happened. I know. But Father does not care what happened. He cares that you exist in a place where people can see you, and that your existence reflects on him. Edward's voice cracked. He told me. He said that if you had any decency left, you would have stayed invisible. I sat down, not because I chose to, but because my legs would not hold me. My father was coming. The man who had looked at his own daughter and decided she was a stain to be covered. Who had not merely disowned me, but erased me. From the portrait, from the family Bible, from the records of the parish where I was christened. He had done it thoroughly and without hesitation. And he had not spoken my name in 5 years. And now he was coming to finish what he'd started. I went to Grosvenor Square that evening. The Duke, James, though I had not yet said it aloud, was in the music room. When I told him, I watched his face change. Not with fear, with something colder and more focused. The look of a man who has been expecting a fight and is almost relieved it has finally arrived. "Friday," he said. "Yes, James, Your Grace. You must understand what this means. My father will make it public. Everything. The scandal, the false name, the fact that I have been in your home unchaperoned. You have never been unchaperoned in this house. That will not matter, and you know it. The appearance is enough. Lady Georgiana will ensure the story spreads, and my father will confirm it. And you will be the Duke who was deceived by a ruined woman. I was not deceived. I sought you out. I found you. I asked you to stay." He was standing by the pianoforte, and the portrait was behind him on the wall. My erased face. His determined one. And the symmetry of it was almost unbearable. "Let him come." "You will lose." "What? What will I lose? The good opinion of people who erase their own children? The approval of a woman who uses cruelty as strategy? The comfortable fiction that I was going to marry someone I feel nothing for, because my dead mother once hoped I would?" His voice rose for the first time, and the force of it vibrated in my chest. "I have spent my entire life in a portrait someone else composed, standing where I was told to stand, wearing the expression I was told to wear, being the son and then the Duke that someone else designed." He stopped. His breath was ragged. "I will not do it any more. Not for Georgiana, not for your father, not for anyone." He crossed the room. He stood before me. And this time there was no hovering, no hesitation. He took my face in both hands, and his palms were warm and slightly rough, and he looked at me the way he had looked at the painting, with that fierce, reverent attention. Except now, it was not the absence of me he was studying. It was the whole of me, present, real, refusing to disappear. "Let him come," he said again, quietly, "and watch what happens." I held his wrists. I did not pull his hands away. I stood in the warmth of them and said, "Then we will need Edward." He kept the letters, the ones Captain Whitfield's commanding officer sent to my father after the complaint was investigated. Father buried them. Edward found them in the study and took them before he left for school. He told me about them in his last letter, the one where he said he tried to stop the portrait. I paused. He said he was keeping them safe, in case I ever needed proof. James's jaw tightened.
will he bring them? If I ask him, he came here to warn me. He is not our father. Then ask him, tonight. Sir Richard Stafford arrived on Friday at 11 o'clock. He came to Grosvenor Square because the Duke had invited him. That was the first thing my father had not expected. The invitation was formal, written on ducal stationery, requesting the pleasure of Sir Richard's company to discuss a matter of mutual interest regarding a recently acquired portrait. It was worded so precisely that refusal would have been conspicuous. My father brought Mr. Cartwright, as Edward had warned. He did not bring Edward himself. He had never brought Edward to anything that mattered. I was not in the room when they arrived. James had asked me to wait in the music room, and I had agreed, because the plan required patience, and patience was one of the few things 5 years of exile had taught me. But I could hear voices through the wall. My father's, clipped, authoritative, familiar as a scar. And James's, lower, steadier, with an evenness that I recognized as control, held very tight. Later, James told me what was said. My father opened with his ultimatum. He knew that a woman calling herself Miss Lennox had been engaged by the Duke under false pretenses. He knew that this woman was in fact Cecilia Stafford, his disgraced daughter, who had been cast out of the family 5 years prior for moral failure. He demanded that the Duke sever all connection with her immediately, or Sir Richard would make the deception public, exposing both the Duke's poor judgment and his daughter's continued disgrace. James listened to all of it. Then he said, "Sir Richard, I invited you here to discuss a portrait. Shall we?" He led my father to the music room door. He opened it. My father walked in and saw me standing beside the painting. His own family's portrait. His wife, his son, his dog, his garden, and the smudge of green paint where his daughter had been. He stopped walking. "Miss Stafford has been my guest," James said, standing in the doorway. "Not under false pretenses. Under my protection. I was aware of her identity before I asked her to remain in my household. I pursued the acquaintance, not she." My father's face was white. He was staring at me, or rather, staring at the portrait behind me, at the evidence of what he had done, displayed in the home of one of the most powerful men in England. "Your Grace," Mr. Cartwright began, Sir Richard's position, James said, "is that of a man who erased his own daughter from a family portrait, and is now standing in a room where that portrait has been restored to a place of honor." His voice was quiet. It did not need to be loud. "I have had the painting examined by Mr. Thomas Lawrence's studio. The overpainting was crude. You hired a local man, I believe, not the original artist. And beneath it, the original figure is largely intact. I have commissioned a restoration. Cecilia will be visible again within the month." My father turned to him. "You have no right." "I own the painting, Sir Richard. I have every right." James stepped into the room. "I also have in my possession correspondence, provided by your son Edward, who arrived in London 3 days ago, carrying documents he has kept safe since he was 16 years old, from Captain Whitfield's commanding officer, documenting the findings of a military inquiry. The officer in question was a married man, twice your daughter's age, who pursued her deliberately, was rejected, and then manufactured the appearance of a compromising situation to punish her refusal. The inquiry concluded that your daughter bore no fault. Those findings were sent to you, Sir Richard. You received them, and you buried them." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. My father looked at me.
For the first time in 5 years, he looked directly at me, and I saw in his face not remorse. I do not think he was capable of remorse, but the cold recognition of a man who has realized he is outmaneuvered. "This will not stand," he said. "The scandal." "There will be no scandal," James said, "because I intend to marry her." The room inverted. I had not known he was going to say it. Not like this. Not in front of my father and a solicitor, and the ghost of my 16-year-old self in a white dress on a canvas. I made a sound, small, involuntary, and James looked at me, and his expression was not triumphant. It was terrified.
Terrified and certain, the way a man looks when he has stepped off a cliff and is choosing to believe in the ground below.
"You—"
My father's voice was strangled. "You would marry a woman with no reputation, no fortune." "I would marry Cecilia Stafford. I do not require anything else." He said it simply, as though it were obvious. As though the woman who had been erased, renamed, exiled, and silenced were the simplest, clearest choice he had ever made. My father left. He did not speak to me on his way out. He walked past me as though the green paint was still there, as though I was still invisible. And I let him go. Mr. Cartwright followed, clutching his papers, his threats deflated. The door closed. James and I stood alone in the music room, with the portrait and the pianoforte and the amber light and the extraordinary, ringing silence of a room where something irrevocable has just occurred. "I should have asked you first," he said.
"Yes, I had planned to. Tonight. Privately.
With considerably more, he gestured vaguely, finesse. "You announced it to my father and his solicitor as a strategic countermeasure." "I announced it to your father and his solicitor because it is the truth, and I was not willing to let another minute pass with him believing he had the power to take you from me." I crossed the room. I took his face in my hands the way he had taken mine, both palms, firm, unshaking, and I kissed him. It was not delicate. It was not tentative. It was the kiss of a woman who had been invisible for 5 years and had just been declared out loud in a room with witnesses to be someone worth choosing. It was relief and fury and joy and the terrifying, glorious freefall of being known, fully known, and wanted anyway. He made a sound against my mouth. His arms came around me. He held on like I might disappear again, and I held on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had been tilting for years. And when we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard, and his forehead was pressed against mine and his eyes were closed. "Cecilia," he said. Just my name, nothing else. But the way he said it, as though it were the answer to the question he'd been asking for 3 years, standing in front of that painting with his fingertips over the ghost of my face. It was enough. The restoration of the portrait was completed in February. Mr. Lawrence's apprentice did the work, painstaking, careful, peeling away the crude green paint to reveal what had been underneath all along. My face, at 16, my white dress, the sprig of jasmine. James hung it in the same place in the music room. He did not move it to a more prominent location or make a spectacle of it. He simply put it back where it had been, as though it had never been altered. We had married in December, in the chapel at Ashford Park. It was a small wedding, Edward and Charlotte as witnesses, Mr. Hale standing at the back with his pocket watch in hand, and a cold, bright morning that turned the frost on the chapel windows into something that looked like lace. I wore pale grey silk. James wore an expression I'd never seen on him before. Unguarded, almost bewildered, as though he could not quite believe that the woman walking toward him down the aisle was real, and not another ghost beneath green paint. When I reached him, he took my hand, and I felt his fingers trembling. And I understood that this man, this duke who had faced down my father without flinching, was terrified of the happiness he was being offered, as though it might be taken back, as though someone might paint over this too. I held his hand tighter. I did not let go. The morning after the restoration was finished, I came downstairs and found James standing in front of the painting, coffee in hand, studying it with the same absorbed attention I had first seen in the corridor at Lady Ashworth's. "You are staring," I said. He turned, and he smiled. Not the suppressed, careful, almost smile of the man I'd met at supper, but a real one, full and warm and slightly crooked. The smile of a man who has stopped composing his own portrait and is simply standing where he wants to stand. "There she is," he said. I stood beside him. He put his arm around my waist. We looked at the painting together. My family as they had been, before the erasure, before the exile, before any of it. "Do you miss them?" he asked. "I miss who they should have been," I said. "I do not miss who they were." Edward visited often. He was reading law, funded by a settlement James had arranged with quiet efficiency, and he brought with him each time a new piece of news about a life he was building on his own terms. Charlotte had married well, a kind man with a good library, and she wrote to me weekly, long letters full of gossip and affection, and the occasional underlined sentence that meant more than its words. Lady Georgiana Holt married a viscount in the spring. I sent flowers. James said this was unnecessarily generous. I said it was precisely the right amount of generous, and he laughed. And the sound of his laughter in the music room was better than any sonata ever written. My father never contacted me again. I did not expect him to. Some people, when confronted with the evidence of what they have done, find it easier to continue looking away. I had made my peace with his silence long before James walked into my life. But the portrait was whole, and on certain mornings, when the light came through the south-facing windows and caught the canvas just so, I could see both layers, the original painting and the faintest shadow of the green that had covered me. A ghost of erasure, visible only if you knew where to look. I did not ask James to have it cleaned further. I liked the shadow there. It was honest. It said, someone tried to make her disappear. They failed. That, I thought, was the truest portrait of all.